Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this special two-episode series, we've linked up with our friends at ACRL to profile one of the latest titles from its monographic publishing group, Text and Data Mining Literacy for Librarians, edited by Whitney Kramer, Ileana Burgos, and Evan Muzal. Whitney and Ileana, both at Cornell University, are research and data librarian and emerging data practices librarian, respectively, while Evan consults for the electrical grid construction industry and was a leader in various data science, anthropology, and humanities teaching and consulting settings for a decade at San Francisco State University, UC Berkeley, and Stanford University. Once at home in the humanities, text and data mining, TDM for short, has quickly gained popularity among researchers across many other disciplines. Library support for the practice has grown just as quickly, and librarians are finding they need to develop their skills in this area. This title aims to be a standalone resource for TDM newbies and experts alike who need to understand how libraries can implement TDM literacy, services, and workflows at their institutions. If, after listening to this series, you're interested in acquiring the title, you can visit the ALA store at alastore.ala.org and use the promo code ACRL20C, which is good for 20% off through December 1st, 2025. In this second episode of this two-part series, Whitney and Ileana share practical applications for text and data mining, including partnerships across disciplines, licensing and legal issues, and how library services in this area will continue to evolve. Yeah, so several chapters highlight how successful TDM support often comes down to partnerships, and I think Ileana, you were kind of hinting at this earlier. Across disciplines, departments, and infrastructures. In your experience, what kinds of campus partners are really, pretty critical or essential to make TDM work? And then how can libraries or librarians position themselves, not just as, quote unquote helpers, but really collaborators in these types of projects?
Yeah, the first and foremost thing someone can do is actually even just looking internally within their libraries. Again, this can very much going to range depending on one's library or institution size. But if there are other, copyright and e-resource specialists on your staff, liaison librarians and selectors, local IT staff, folks that are already under your library institution, connect with them first and foremost to talk about how they're understanding different issues related to TDM, because in our work, certainly at Cornell University Library, we rely on our colleagues in those categories consistently, because any kind of patron inquiry about a new data source or tool, or looking at different sort of technical specs, we really need to rely on each other, our colleagues' interests and skills in these areas to help support patrons. So number one, look within your institution. There's a lot of folks who have important specializations to work with you on this. And number two, stay engaged in local conversations on emerging tech in your campus. That might mean keeping an eye on the local news to see different task forces working on this area, whether that's text data mining, artificial intelligence, whatever the case may be. And just, reach out, stay involved, network with those individuals, instructors that are engaging some text data mining methods, stay in touch with them, ask what's frustrating with that for them in their workflows. And really, over time, building that sort of rapport helps you understand what are some of the core issues that you're seeing within campus from different perspectives. What are some different interventions that you use the library system can kind of help address? And also, what kind of unique specializations do you offer for the table to help other folks understand why this landscape could be so tricky? So those are some quick thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Whitney, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's just really important to also learn what your researchers are working on. My introduction into text and data mining was actually through a graduate student who came to me and said, I want to do this big project with text and data mining and economics that would have required us acquiring some new tools that I was not as familiar with. So I wound up upskilling myself right alongside this student to help support them. And I think it's really, because you have these things that you might think that researchers want, but it's really important for them to tell you what they want and they need as well. And that can really help guide how you build those partnerships that Ileana was talking about, because there's no use in sort of like screaming into the void. I think it's really important to kind of hear from the researchers, from the students and faculty themselves, that they want and need these things before you try and go and build them.
Right. Yeah, it's always a worthwhile thing to do, to reach out to faculty and researchers and make those connections, no matter what,
Yeah.
what the need is. I mean, we could always use better communication with those groups. I'm wondering, just as a follow on, if you see whether it's worthwhile to set up some kind of more formal capacity within the library, where there, maybe a team, if there's enough folks to do this, or if there's a need to bring in library leadership to kind of formalize this process, or rather than doing it kind of on an ad hoc basis.
Yeah, I think there can certainly be a lot of layers of support. Again, totally
Yeah,
taking into consideration some folks at smaller institutions may not have that kind of capacity,
right.
but absolutely, if they're, I think earlier on in my time at Cornell, I think Whitney and I were involved on a few different working groups with individuals, other folks that were starting to get text data related questions and not really sure who to go to or how to address them adequately. So we were on a number of different internal working groups to help kind of figure that out, and communicated
Mhm.
with our leadership and felt supported from our leadership and department heads to really see how we could bolster this work. And that's also how the task force that we mentioned earlier in the Ivy Plus network helped, partially of how that manifested as well, that there was a group from several different institutions knowing that this was an issue. And so, yeah, we certainly can emphasize the value of that, of putting together people in a room so they can figure things out and help address
Right,
together.
right. Excellent. Okay. Um, so you mentioned copyright a little bit ago, which can be a little bit of a scary topic for a lot of us, and licensing as well. The book notes that this is probably an area that's been covered most frequently of late. And you do, the title does dig deeply into this, including data set licensing and ethical considerations for copyrighted materials. Just curious, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest legal or licensing challenges librarians are facing right now? And how can they start to build those, legal literacies, so to speak, that they need to support researchers?
I mean, I'll just start by saying that our biggest disclaimer is that we are not legal experts and we're just practitioners who can speak to what we ourselves have experienced.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, with that said, we certainly, in our introduction and throughout the book, definitely emphasize different resources and projects that are engaging issues
Mm,
of copyright and licensing really head on. I definitely want to give a shout out to the volume "Building Legal Literacies for Text and Data Mining," which is edited by Rachel Sandberg and Timothy Vollmer. So that it came out in 2021, but that's a really great intro for folks that want to get really into the meat and bones, and a good introduction on various copyright and licensing considerations from the get-go. And certainly chapter 11, the legal and ethical considerations for curating copyrighted collections as data. Copyrighted collections as data is a huge topic and issue, especially for folks that, there's only so many materials that are in the public domain or publicly available that are
right.
of interest. And so that project in particular, I think, is doing some awesome work in bringing together library workers, researchers, other stakeholders in that process to kind of think through what's a better workflow or what are some solutions. So definitely want to point people to those projects as examples. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest licensing challenges that we run into and that I've personally experienced, especially with TDM, is that vendors will often require separate licensing agreements for text and data mining on top of the often hefty subscription fees that we already pay for the databases that researchers are hoping to mine. And this can be really frustrating for researchers who often don't understand the intricacies of those library licensing agreements in the first place, let alone when you add in the additional complication of a second license that requires additional funding.
Do you see, I mean, when you say vendors, are we talking about vendors that libraries would customarily be partnering with anyway in terms? Okay. Um,
Yes.
are you starting to see licensing agreements that kind of proactively build in that TDM element, or not so much yet?
It ranges.
It
Yeah.
depends.
It definitely
Okay.
ranges. There are certainly some vendors that, one of the first things whenever someone asks us about some material for that they want to data mine from our databases or some other source, will be to look at the terms, obviously the license and the terms of
Yeah.
use. There will be some that explicitly say we support text and data mining of our resources. They might service it through a particular API or so forth, but they
Hmm.
find ways to really emphasize that, like, you do not have to ask us our explicit permission. Here are the parameters under which we expect you to data mine. And then there will certainly be others that, to Whitney's earlier points, understand that text data has value to researchers and are, have found ways, by developing different sort of proprietary tools to in one way protect the data that they steward, and
Uh-huh.
certainly understand that need, but also essentially just make research a little bit more closed into those particular environments rather than finding more ways that are in line with open scholarship. So certainly some
Right.
of our authors are really engaged in that area in the chapters in the book too.
Excellent. Good. So another fun part of the book is all the case studies that you offer. I'm wondering if either of you could kind of highlight a couple that you were either surprised about or thought were particularly interesting, and might share that with us.
Yeah, we really had so many wonderful case studies. It's funny that you mentioned Jeremy Darrington's chapter about mining congressional hearings, because that's actually one of the examples I've been using as a standout case study since we originally got the proposal. I'm also going to highlight chapter 18 by Kiao Pan, TDM Reimagined, a case study of leveraging generative AI to mine Japanese diet proceeding records. And I found
Hmm.
that one really fascinating. I'm primarily a social sciences librarian, and it was so interesting to consider the ways in which TDM could really be utilized on corpora of government documents. Neither of us are archivists, but we were also really pleased to be able to include those chapters on utilizing text mining with archival materials as well. It really just demonstrates there's such a wide variety of ways in which TDM can be applied broadly across disciplines, and that it really isn't just restricted to the humanities, even if it is most traditionally applied there.
Excellent. Ileana, anything else?
Yeah, I just want to, say really, really such a pleasure learning from so many perspectives on these case studies. The only other one I want to shout out for sure is Ye Li's Chapter 19, Text and Data Mining in Science and Engineering, Exploring Use Cases and Support Services. I think that chapter is a really great way to fill a particular gap in discussions applicable to TDM literacy in science and engineering contexts. And
Hmm.
Ye was also someone which was one of the surprises, I guess, through the process, when she started her drafting, was employed by MIT and then transitioned to Cornell University Library in the course of it. So she became a colleague through the process of writing her chapter, which is special.
Awesome. I'm just going to kind of expose my newbiness here with TDM, but I was surprised to learn that it started in the humanities and then expanded into the sciences. I would have assumed would have been the opposite. Can either of you kind of like explain that history for us?
Yeah, I mean, I know that certainly there might be some graininess even on my own understanding of some of the history because maybe some
Hmm.
people will find, of course, with history of natural language processing and linguistics, the humanist, I guess the humanist angle is really that there was a lot of emphasis on earlier digital humanities days on exploring different ways of engaging text as a common, form of like literary study and so forth. So some different methods that were emerging came from digital humanists that had built that had some of that training in computer information science in earlier times, but we're also really interested in experimenting with, in new ways. So certainly we can, I think the discourse, the reason that we kind of pinpoint into the humanities is because there's so much discourse within the sort of earlier digital humanities days, and maybe like that's, 2010s. And a bit earlier, but it certainly doesn't. That means to say that there was certainly a lot different kinds of work happening in different disciplines, but certainly the humanities gets some of that credit.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So just taking a look ahead a few years, how do you sort of anticipate librarian roles to evolve in this space? How do you see specific skill development or partnerships or even policy frameworks evolving? And that will matter most to libraries as they figure out how to sort of sustain TDM support over the long term. And then one thing I thought was curious was, how TDM and AI literacy skills might go hand in hand, since so many of us are obviously, learning AI literacy skills at this point.
Yeah, I will warn you, we had a lot of notes for this question. This is one I think we could talk about for a while.
Yeah.
I really see TDM literacy and AI literacy as shared competencies. And while they feel like somewhat trendy research methods, you can't
Hmm.
truly utilize text and data mining tools or AI tools if you don't understand how they work or what they're designed to accomplish. We often see students who tell us that they want to utilize text and data mining as part of their research, but they don't necessarily understand that it might be pointless in certain cases. Um, it's also similar to AI. There's been a big push towards utilizing large language models and other AI tools in research workflows, but researchers don't necessarily take the time to understand what they're designed to do, what tasks they can help accomplish, or what the potential downsides are. And that's why librarian skills and understanding is so important, and why we need the resources like this book in order for those in the field to understand how to use them in order to support researchers.
Hmm. Ileana, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Whitney put it really well. And, I'll just emphasize again that like we wouldn't have large language models if text data didn't exist, right?
Right.
So really text data mining methods and approaches are really a fundamental building block of different generative AI technologies in particular that are getting the highlight. But really being able to build on like broader data literacy, algorithmic literacy, all of these different ways that we think about these technologies and how they build up into something that is a little bit more, quote unquote, advanced in the AI space is really beneficial for helping people unpack both the narratives, but also kind of look under the hood on how this technology is built, that it doesn't just appear. It's not just a superior mode of research inherently because it has a sort of trendy title or trendy label. So it's also, I think, really importantly tied to critical digital literacies when we talk about how these literacies intersect. It means that we're not just looking at them in isolation, but in conversation.
Excellent. All right. Well, Whitney and Ileana, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you so much for having us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You just heard from Whitney Kramer and Ileana Burgos, co-editors, along with Evan Muzzall, of the title Text and Data Mining Literacy for Librarians, available now from ACRL. Remember, if you want to purchase the book, visit the ALA store at alastore.ala.org. Use the promo code ACRL20C, good for 20% off through December 1st, 2025. The Authority File podcast is brought to you every week by Choice and produced by digital media producer Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.